Some stories begin with love. Some begin with loss. And some begin the moment everything falls apart. This is Scarlett After Dark. Scarlett After Dark.
I'm Scarlett Stone. This is The Unraveling, a story about a secret affair, a dissolving marriage, and what it cost to want the wrong man. Let's get into it. Preface. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something. I did this. Not to David, not to James exactly, though he would disagree. I did this to myself, and in doing it to myself, I did it to my children, to my marriage, to the life we had built together over 23 years. I blew it up. Not all at once, not with malice, but with the slow and deliberate accumulation of 1,000 small choices that all pointed in the same direction. Out. I am not writing this to be forgiven. I'm writing it because the only thing I know how to do with pain this specific is to put it on a page and look at it until it stops having power over me. This is therapy. This is confession. This is me at 57, finally telling the truth about who I am and what I did and why. Not because I owe it to anyone, but because I owe it to myself. I knew the marriage was over long before I admitted it. I knew before San Francisco. I knew before David. David just made it impossible to keep pretending otherwise. And for that, complicated as it is, I am almost grateful. I deserved some of what followed. The punishment fit the crime in ways I couldn't have anticipated and wouldn't have chosen. But I also knew, somewhere underneath all of it, that it was time. That staying would have been its own kind of slow death. That the woman I was becoming inside that life was not a woman I recognized or wanted to be. This is her story. The one she told herself when no one was watching. The one she's finally ready to tell out loud. This is The Unraveling, and I'm Scarlett Stone. Chapter 1. Here comes David Rose. When we met in 2019, I knew I wanted him. We'd been mildly flirting on Instagram for months, the kind of flirting that lives in the ambiguity of a well-timed like, a comment that could mean nothing or everything. My marriage wasn't fulfilling me. It hadn't been for a long time. So when I booked the trip to San Francisco, I already knew how the night would end. I'd have dinner with him, go back to his place, and let something happen that I'd been quietly deciding to let happen for months. What I didn't know was how much I'd drink. What I didn't know was that I wouldn't remember most of it. And I certainly didn't know that I'd spend the next 6 years of my life obsessing over this man. That he'd become the fault line everything else collapsed along. But here comes David Rose. Short, bald, stocky, Jewish. A man I'd known for years without a single romantic thought, until now. I still don't entirely understand why. What shifted? The restaurant was in the corner lot of a busy street in the marina, an upscale burger joint new to the area. Terracotta facade, packed parking lot. Everyone apparently said they had the best burgers. I was coming from my former colleague's place around the corner, and when I turned the corner, I saw him before he saw me. Sitting on a bench outside, leaning over his phone, scrolling. Not performing calm, just waiting in that slightly distracted way people wait when they're more nervous than they want to admit. He looked up when I approached, stood. The nervousness was right there on the surface, and he didn't try to hide it, which I found immediately disarming. He opened the door for me, checked in with the host, and they led us to a booth in the back, quiet, candlelit, away from the noise of the main room. Dark and warm in a way that felt slightly incongruous for a burger joint, but somehow exactly right. The table was old wood, the kind salvaged from somewhere, worn smooth from years of other people's evenings. Two old souls at an old table. There was something about sitting down across from him that felt strangely familiar. Not like a first date, more like a reunion with someone you'd known in another lifetime and were only now placing. He ordered 2 margaritas and 2 burgers without asking. I liked that. And then we started talking, and I understood. This was a man who knew how to hold a room. I'd seen it professionally more than once. He had a voice like velvet, smooth and unhurried, and eye contact so direct and steady it would make even me forget my train of thought. He led with questions, real ones, the kind that told you he'd actually been listening rather than waiting for his turn. I told him I was thinking about pivoting, that I wanted to get back to something I'd loved in my early career, beauty specifically, building a brand around something tactile and sensory and mine. His eyes lit up. He leaned forward. He asked things that built on each other, that took what I'd said and went deeper, until at some point he reached across the table and touched my hand, turning it over, looking at my nails. A deep hunter green, a Chanel color I'd been wearing for weeks. "This," he said, "this is exactly the kind of thing you should be doing." Quietly, like it was just for me. Like he'd already decided it was true before I finished the sentence. I didn't know then that I was describing goddess. I didn't know yet that I was describing the thing that would keep me sane while everything else fell apart. I just knew that this man had listened, really listened, and that it made me want him even more than I already did. We were both nervous that night, equally and at the same time, which I hadn't expected. I have never been short on confidence at a dinner table, not with anyone. But something about his energy and mine in that particular room felt like more than a date. We talked about our lives, our marriages, both of us tethered to partners cut from the same cloth. Only children, both of them. The particular formation that produces adults who have never been told the world doesn't revolve around them, who arrived in adulthood with all their edges intact and no real sense that other people's needs might occasionally outrank their own. David and I had both spent years carrying the weight of that, hustling while they stood still, building while they watched. There was relief in saying it to someone who didn't need it explained. By the time we finished eating, I wanted him more than I had when I arrived. We hit the weed dispensary before it closed, bought a pre-roll, and took an Uber back to his place with a bottle of Pinot Noir from a wine shop along the way. I didn't smoke often, but that night felt like the right occasion for it. His apartment was sparse. A gray couch, a table, a decorative surfboard propped against the wall. White walls so bare, I teased him about them. Modern and clean, intentionally minimal in the way that reads as either bachelor or fresh start. The kind of place a man sets up when he's telling himself a particular story about his life. He poured the wine and asked if I wanted to go up to the roof. "Sure," I said. The rooftop was small, but the view opened up to the bay. The water dark and glittering, the bridge lit up in the distance. We smoked, and at some point he pulled me in close. No music, no reason given, and we slow danced in small circles with the city spread out behind us. It was the kind of moment that feels scripted by the city itself. One of those perfect San Francisco nights that makes you understand how people could ruin their lives there. Back downstairs, in the kitchen, he suggested we play Truth or Dare. I thought, that's absurd. We're adults. I said yes. He led with questions. I could see what he was doing, steering us toward the inevitable, waiting for me to give him permission so he wouldn't have to take it. I knew what he wanted. I gave it to him anyway. I dared him to kiss me. He moved quickly, tongue first, stiff, urgent, no patience behind it. The kiss of a man who had perhaps never learned any better, or had simply forgotten in the years since anyone had mattered enough to teach him. I hadn't kissed anyone like this in years. I didn't particularly like kissing James. The intimacy of it had always felt slightly wrong in ways I couldn't fully articulate. And so I had lived, for the entirety of my marriage, essentially unkissed. But underneath David's urgency, there was something real, something that wanted me specifically. And I found I didn't mind any of it. He pulled back and asked quietly whether I'd had thoughts about us being together. Yes, I said. And then I leaned in and told him about one, a fantasy I'd been carrying around for months. The two of us walking home from dinner when it starts to rain, ducking into an alley where the drops don't reach. Him leaning against the brick, me lifting my skirt, straddling him on a fire hydrant, sliding down onto him while the rain fell around us. Moving together, soaked through, like something out of a movie. I was dizzy by then. The margaritas, the wine, the weed, none of it had been a good idea in combination, and my body was letting me know. I moved to the couch and sat down, and then I was gone. I don't know how much time passed. I remember David asking if I wanted to come upstairs, that I'd be more comfortable. I remember trying to text my friend Mallory, too much to drink, not coming home, see you tomorrow. My fingers slow and stupid on the screen. I remember the winding metal staircase, his hand at my back. I remember turning to him on those stairs and saying, half to myself, "What do you want with me? I'm old. You could have anyone younger." And him looking at me like I'd said something genuinely absurd. "That's ludicrous," he said. What comes next arrives in fragments. Pressure, weight, the ceiling above me. His bare chest against mine, all of him, his full weight pressing down. The sound of our breathing, heavy, urgent. And a thought cutting through the haze with the particular clarity that only the truly drunk can access. He's not that big. Sliding in and out of me with ease, though maybe that was because of how wet I was. Wetter than I could remember ever being, wetter than I knew I was still capable of. The fog rolled back in, and I don't remember anything else for a while, until his voice, asking something I had to swim up through layers to understand. "Can I come inside you?" It took me a moment to register what was happening, what had already been happening, that he was. "Okay," I said, because what else was there to say in that moment, in that body, in that state? He finished, and then I heard myself speak, almost from somewhere outside myself. I've never cheated on James. He made a sound, a kind of strangled, theatrical, "Oh God," and I told him it was okay, that I'd just never gone there before. I'm not sure who I was reassuring. We both passed out, me for the second time. I woke up to David asking if I wanted some water. He got it. I lay there and looked around the room properly for the first time. The night before, I'd barely registered it, too dizzy, too gone. But now I could see it. The bedding was plush and deliberate, the pillows down and impossibly soft. The side tables matched. The whole room considered in a way the rest of the apartment wasn't. This wasn't a space a 50-something bachelor had put together. It had a woman's touch. A pied-à-terre, I'd come to think. The kind of arrangement where two people swap weeks and maintain a careful fiction of separateness. Downstairs was his story. Up here was hers. And she had never really left. I noted it the way I was noting everything, quietly, without comment, adding it to the pile. A man who told me he'd been separated for years. A bedroom that told a different story. I filed it. I didn't ask. I could have laid in that bed with him for days. The only thing that would have made it better was a rainstorm. I hadn't been with another man in 18 years, and yet being with David felt so natural, like we had spent a lifetime entwined, like my body already knew his before my mind had caught up. His body made sense to mine in a way I hadn't anticipated. The fit of him. I'd been with men who were too much, who made the whole thing feel like an endurance. This was different. This was easy and right in some purely physical way that had nothing to do with anything else, which made it both simpler and more complicated than everything that followed. We found each other again in that half-light, the way you find someone when you've already decided you want them. I got on top, took his hands and placed them over my breasts, held them there with mine. Looked at him while I moved, slowly, deliberately, every stroke intentional. And then I reached up and touched his face, really touched it, my palm against his cheek, taking him in. I told him I thought he was handsome. He blushed. This man who commanded rooms, who had that voice and that eye contact and all that practiced ease, went slightly pink and looked away. Something about that completely undid me. His eyes didn't leave mine. Our bodies found each other's rhythm the way bodies do when something is working at a cellular level, beyond preference or technique or thought. We were one thing. For those minutes in that California morning light, we were completely one thing. Afterward, I finished him with my mouth, something I'd apparently never forgotten how to do well. One hand working the shaft, my tongue doing the rest. "Oh, God," he breathed. "Baby." His sounds told me everything I needed to know. If that were the last thing I ever heard on earth, I would die satisfied. He turned me over and went down on me. I grabbed the pillow and pressed it over my face, not out of shame, but out of the specific embarrassment of a sound I couldn't control, the kind that comes from somewhere you didn't know existed until someone finds it. I didn't want to howl at this man I barely knew. I did anyway, muffled by 400 thread count. And I was close, genuinely, achingly close, the kind of close that makes you hold your breath and go very still. And then he stopped. Just stopped. I should have read that for what it was. I didn't. Downstairs, after, I asked him to zip me up. He did. He seemed slightly anxious, moving a little faster than the morning called for, a low-grade restlessness I registered and chose not to name. He walked me out. I should have known then what that energy meant. I didn't know that either. That's the thing about hindsight. It doesn't arrive all at once. It accrues. 6 years later, I can see the whole shape of it, the fault lines, the exits I didn't take, the signs I reframed as quirks because I wanted to. But in that apartment in the marina, in the pale light of a California morning, all I knew was that I wasn't done, that something had started, that I was already, without fully knowing it, in trouble. Chapter 2. The First Crack. Let me be clear about something before we go any further. I am hot. Present tense. I say that without apology and with full awareness of how it sounds. But it's relevant, and it's true, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. In 2019, I was a little more voluptuous than I am today. I'd gained some weight over the prior couple of years and was in the midst of working it back off. But I was sexy, undeniably so, and I knew it. Long, dark hair, pinned straight, light eyes, blue striking against olive skin in the way that stops people mid-sentence. The face of an Italian woman, dark-featured and not quite like anyone else you've seen. Always put together, always stylish. The kind of woman who gets attention in rooms without trying, and sometimes despite trying not to. I was still working, still sharp, still carrying myself with the particular confidence of a woman who has built things and knows she can build more. I knew what I wanted. I had always gotten it. Back then, especially, people found me strikingly beautiful. Strikingly. That specific word, used often enough that I stopped being surprised by it. Not conventionally pretty. Not the Malibu blonde with filled lips and a frozen forehead. Something else. Something that made people look twice and then look again, trying to place it. I never wanted to look like anyone else. I still don't. My uniqueness, in looks and in personality, has always felt like the truest thing about me. It's also the thing that's beaten me down. That's the part people don't see coming. They see the confidence and the beauty and the woman who walks into a room like she owns it, and they assume it's all effortless, all armor, all joy. And it is joy. Genuinely, it is. I have always had a wildness and a happiness that is completely unself-conscious. Arms up, laughing, fully present, refusing to be anywhere other than exactly where I am. That quality has been with me since before I can remember. It's the one thing my father couldn't take from me no matter how hard he tried. And he tried. "You're a loser," he said. "You'll never amount to anything." And I walked out of that house and into the world and turned every single volume dial up as high as it would go. Because the alternative was to believe him. And I have never once believed him. But I'm going to tell you something I don't usually admit. All of this, the marriage unraveling, the money gone, the friendships that didn't survive, the daughter who stopped speaking to me, the couch in California, the dark house in Wyoming. It changed me. Not broke me, changed me. There's a version of myself I'm still trying to find on the other side of all of it. The woman who walked into rooms like she owned them is still in here, but she's been quieter lately, more careful, trying to figure out what she actually wants now that everything she thought she wanted has either left or been dismantled. And for a woman who has always known exactly who she is, that's the most disorienting thing of all. Being too much, too confident, too present, too striking, too honest, too fully yourself in a world that keeps asking women to take up less space has a cost. My closest friends were sometimes jealous of me, not because of my face exactly, but because of my attitude, the way I moved through the world like I had a right to it, the way I never apologized for wanting things. Some people are lit up by that quality, and some people over time need to extinguish it. I have spent my life navigating which is which. I have always been the friend who never said no to the adventure, to the late night, to the spontaneous plan, to the person who needed me. I also, it must be said, did not always say no to things I probably should have. Boundaries have not historically been my strong suit. This will become relevant. I'm a straight shooter. I see through people almost instantly. It's a gift and a curse in equal measure. Anyone operating with a hidden agenda, anyone telling me what I want to hear instead of what's true, I clock it and I'm done. I don't have patience for performance. I never have. If you ask me not to ask the hard questions, I ask them louder. If you try to walk me on a leash, I find the door. But not David. He was the exception to every rule I thought I had about people. He disarmed me in a way I still can't fully explain. My radar, which had never failed me, went completely silent around him. Some forces are stronger than your instincts. His was. What nobody sees, what almost nobody ever sees, is the other thing, the thing hiding inside the firecracker. I am a hopeless romantic. Deeply, embarrassingly, completely. A lover of poetry and love songs and the specific ache of wanting someone so much it rewrites your entire interior landscape. I feel things at a depth that would genuinely shock the people who think they know me. I love at the speed of arrow flight, and I want someone who can run beside me, not one who needs me to slow down so he can keep up. I speak bluntly and hate being misread. I love big and, when it's finally over, leave clean. I have spent my entire adult life being one of the most honest people in any room I've occupied. I value truth above almost everything. More chances to cheat on my husband than I could count, and I never did. Not once. Not a kiss, not a moment, not a lingering look that went somewhere it shouldn't have. For years, I was completely, boringly faithful to a man I knew wasn't right for me. Because whatever else I wasn't someone who did that. But not with David. Something about him made me willing to toss out every moral I had carefully constructed over a lifetime. What switch he flipped, what door he walked through that everyone else had knocked on and been turned away from, I still don't fully know. I only know that he walked through it, and I let him. I have always gotten what I wanted, through a bone-deep certainty that whatever I wanted was already mine before I had it. Wanting something hard enough and showing up fully enough has always, always been sufficient. Until David rose. He is the one thing I have ever wanted that I could not make mine. I have never worked so hard for the affection of any person in my life. With everyone else, wanting it hard enough was always enough. With him, it was never enough. It would torment me for years. I became obsessed, not in the way people use that word casually, but in the bone-deep, irrational, all-consuming way that hijacks your entire interior life and refuses to vacate. The first crack in a belief system I had built my entire existence on. And here we are. Chapter 3. The Morning After. That afternoon, back at Mallory's, I took a string of work calls and tried to feel normal. Then David texted, "Just checking in. You okay?" I knew what that was. Not quite concern, more like reconnaissance, testing whether I was going to be a problem. I texted back quickly and then panicked, remembering I'd left my iPad on the kitchen counter at home, on the island where we kept cookbooks and recipes, visible to anyone who walked by. I asked him to move to Instagram, which, in retrospect, was barely smarter. But that's the kind of logic you operate on the morning after. He messaged me there instead. Asked if everything was good. I said yes, and then, because apparently I had no instinct for self-preservation, I asked whether this was a one-and-done situation or something else. I told him either way was fine. He said he had a full day, meetings and dinner, but that it wasn't one and done. Of course it wasn't. I had just let this man have sex with me while I was barely conscious, woken up asking for more, and was now extending an open invitation. I had handed him every card in the deck. What man walks away from that? I stayed in San Francisco 2 more days. Not a word from David. Only the occasional like on my Instagram stories. Enough to keep the thread alive without actually pulling it. I recognized it for what it was and liked it anyway. When I got home to Westchester, my husband mentioned it almost casually, the way he mentioned most things. "You should probably disconnect your email from the iPad. Your texts were coming through." The iPad on the kitchen counter, the one we used for recipes. I smiled and said I would. I did not think about how close that was for approximately 3 days. I flew home with something clarified inside me. Not about David, exactly. I wasn't naive enough yet to call it that. But about my marriage, about James. The truth was, I'd known for years that I needed to leave. David had just made it impossible to keep pretending otherwise. James and I met at work. He was in the middle of a divorce, raw, untethered, the kind of sad that makes a person need an audience. And a friend of mine and I would take him out for drinks to cheer him up. I had just been hired on the project, and James, as the company, had kept me on when it extended. He was short, dark-haired, brown-eyed, behind big glasses, thin, with a pointy nose and teeth that weren't quite right. Not physically attractive in any conventional sense, but the man had style. Impeccable, considered, the kind that makes you look twice regardless of what's underneath it. His mind was sharp and he was witty, and he carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who had been told his entire life that he was exceptional. He had come from money and private schools, the kind of upbringing where every achievement was celebrated and every mood was accommodated, and no one ever told him his shit stank. An only child, which I had come to recognize as a particular kind of formation. His mother and father had adored him, put him on a pedestal, made him the center of everything. He arrived in adulthood with all his edges still on him. Meanwhile, I had grown up in a house where my parents barely knew where I was or what I was doing, with two sisters who kept me humble the way only siblings can, with a father who had his own particular ideas about my worth. James and I came from opposite ends of the same story. He was incredibly persistent. I broke up with him, more than once, because something in me kept registering that this wasn't right, that the fit was off, that I was settling for fine when I had always believed I deserved more than fine. And every time I walked away, he found a way to pull me back. He was good at that. The grand gesture. The phone call that went on too long. The way he showed up. The last time, he showed up with a house. His divorce had finalized and he'd bought a place in Pacific Heights, asked if I wanted to help him decorate it. I should have said no. I said yes. One thing led to another, the way things do when you're lonely and someone is persistent, and the house is beautiful, and it's easier to walk through an open door than to keep finding reasons to walk away. And then I was living there, renovating it, and then I was pregnant. I want to be honest about the James years, because it's easy to make him a villain, and he wasn't. He was a great friend. Genuinely. We laughed. We had similar taste in music and interiors, and the particular way a room should feel. He was funny and driven, and in the early years, successful in a way that felt solid. The sex was fine. He was generous, always took care of me first, which counts for something. But I never once looked at him across a pillow and felt that thing, that fuck me feeling, that pull in the stomach that makes everything else irrelevant. It was never there with James. What was there, eventually, was something darker. When I traveled for work, which was often, which was necessary, which was the thing keeping us financially afloat, James would accuse me of cheating. Not once, repeatedly, obsessively. The calls would come late, suspicious and probing, building toward an accusation that was already decided before I picked up. I hadn't touched anyone. I had more than enough opportunity. The road has a particular looseness to it, late nights and hotel bars and men who find capable women magnetic. But I never once crossed that line. Not until David. There was something specific about David. Everything before him I could walk away from. Him, I couldn't. But James didn't believe that, or couldn't. And when I came home, if I hadn't sufficiently proven my innocence over the phone, there was a price. Either you fuck me or you get out of my bed. Not every time, but enough times that I knew the shape of it before it arrived. Enough times that I learned to read the particular silence that preceded it, the set of his jaw, the way he'd go still, and calculate my options. The couch, the guest room, or this. It became a pattern, and with it, James became someone I didn't recognize, desperate and mean in ways the man I'd married had never been, or had hidden well enough that I hadn't seen coming. His behavior was demeaning. It made me feel worthless, used. His love, I was learning, came with conditions. and conditions were something I already knew too well. I had grown up with a man whose affection was a moving target, whose approval could be given and revoked without warning. I had chosen James in part because I believed he was the opposite of that. Safe, steady, a man who would never leave, never raise a hand, never make me feel small. I had been wrong about that last part. I told myself it wasn't what it was. I told myself a lot of things in those years that I have since stopped telling myself. I don't say this to villainize him entirely. He was a man who was afraid of losing something he'd built his identity around, and fear makes people ugly in ways they don't always recognize in themselves. But I also know that what happens in the dark of a marriage, the quiet coercions, the unspoken transactions, the things you consent to because the alternative feels worse, those things have weight. They accumulate. And they were part of why, when David Rose looked at me across that candlelit table and actually listened, I felt something crack open that I hadn't known was sealed shut. I never really kissed James, not the way you kiss someone you want. And so I lived, for the entirety of my marriage, essentially without being kissed. A kissless marriage, years and years of it. I didn't fully register what that cost me until I understood what kissing was supposed to feel like. And then I understood it all at once, with a force that made the years of its absence unbearable to think about. David wasn't a perfect kisser either, not at first. But there was something underneath the urgency that had nothing to do with technique, a feeling I can only describe as recognition, like two people finding each other across more time than one lifetime accounts for. I told him this the last time we spoke. He sort of dismissed it. That hurt more than most things he did. I knew from the beginning with James that the fit was off, and I stayed anyway. And I have spent considerable time since trying to understand why. Part of it was the pregnancy, which arrived before either of us had made any real decision. Part of it was that I genuinely loved him, even if I wasn't in love with him. There is a difference, and it matters. Part of it was simpler than any of that. I was tired of fighting the current, and he was offering a shore. I remember a trip we took early on, somewhere beautiful and expensive, the kind of trip that's supposed to mean something. And James spent most of it off on his bike, cycling ahead, disappearing around corners, never quite beside me. He moved through the world like that generally, always a few steps ahead, never thinking to slow down and match my pace, never reaching for my hand on a street that deserved it, never turning to take my picture in a moment that would have meant everything, a small gesture that would have said, "I see you. I want to remember this. I want to remember you here." Those gestures never came. I wasn't someone he thought to document. I was just someone who was there. I wasn't angry exactly. I was just aware. Aware that this was the shape of it. Interestingly, the moment I told him I wanted to leave, all of that changed. Suddenly he was attentive, present, at my beck and call in a way he had never managed to be when I wasn't threatening to go. For a few years, he tried in ways he hadn't tried before, and it was nice, genuinely nice, and it still wasn't enough. Because it didn't change the fundamental truth underneath all of it. I should never have settled. I should never have married him. No amount of effort after the fact could retroactively create the thing that was never there to begin with. I had so many chances to choose something else. When James lost his job and the Pacific Heights house had to go, sold at a loss, the savings evaporated, the life we'd built suddenly just a number on a page, I watched him go numb. And while he was numb, I organized everything. From the road, working, I found him a temporary place to live. I dealt with the moving company. I found a new home for us in the marina. I arranged for the kids to spend the summer with my sister so James could process his feelings about his poor life without 2 children watching. He was depressed and difficult and not particularly kind to be around. And I managed every logistical detail of our collapse while he stood in the middle of it, feeling sorry for himself. That should have been the moment. I knew it then. And when we were eventually forced to move east to Westchester, because my income alone wasn't enough and the goodwill of friends and family willing to lend money had run out, I sorted that too. The move, the schools, the new routines, all of it, while working, while he wasn't. He resisted bitterly, the way he resisted anything that required him to accept a reality he hadn't chosen. And once we were there, he never let me forget it. Westchester was not California. The house was not the house. The life was not the life he'd been promised, as though the life had been promised to him specifically, as though I had not also lost something, as though I was not the one who had found the house, negotiated the lease, enrolled the kids in school, and was still, somehow, the only one bringing in a paycheck. He would walk through rooms with a particular dissatisfaction. Not rage, just a low-grade contempt for his own surroundings that he wore like a second skin. He hated the state. He hated the house. And yet he did absolutely nothing to change either. No job, no plan, no hustle, just the daily, quiet communication that this was not good enough, delivered by a man who was contributing nothing towards something better. I absorbed it. I kept going. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd find his footing, that things would turn around, that the man I'd married was still in there somewhere underneath the resentment. I kept telling myself that for years. It was one of the longest cons I ever ran, and I was running it on myself. I should have left him at the height of my career. That's the one I've never fully forgiven myself for. I had the leverage then, the income, the independence, the momentum. I could have landed on my feet. Instead, I kept choosing to stay because he had no one else. And it was easier not to. And the kids needed stability. And I called these reasons when they were really just excuses dressed up in the language of selflessness. By the time I finally said the true thing out loud, my feet weren't quite as steady. But that comes later. I carried all of this home with me from San Francisco. And for the first time, instead of setting it back down in its usual place, I let myself hold it. New chapters of The Unraveling drop every Monday. We all have secrets. Some we never say out loud. If you have a story that lives in the dark, obsession, betrayal, heartbreak, desire, reinvention, I want to hear it. Send me an email at lipservice68@gmail.com or find me on YouTube at Scarlett After Dark Official. Your secrets are safe with me. Let's tell your story.
This is Scarlet After Dark. Scarlet After Dark. Scarlet